rather than for the civilian, in other words, diplomatic aspects of it.
Where was the fatal flaw?
Well, the fatal flaw, of course, was primarily in there were altogether 8 conferences, major conferences. There were several conferences at which the American staff was present. The Secretary of State, the American interpreter, Charlie Bolin, who was a State Department official, Admiral Leahy, who was naval advisor to the president, he was present. Harry Hopkins was sitting right behind the president. Alger Hiss was another one sitting behind the president.
The infamous Alger Hiss.
Yes. Stettinius was Secretary of State at that time. He was sitting also next to the president. And another one was another state official, State Department official. Well, of course, the British delegation and we military people met separately. The Chief of Staff, as a matter of fact, was not even present at that time. Then President Roosevelt had 2 conferences with Stalin alone. Even Churchill was not present. And there was no American interpreter with him. There was a Russian interpreter, a young Lieutenant Pavlov, who was Stalin's interpreter.
Shocking.
Only 2.
That's a shocking...
To me, it was shocking. We know what happened in the 8 conferences. In fact, I have in my files today practically a complete discussion of what was going on in those conferences. They were published 10 years after Yalta in the U.S. News and World Report, and I have them. But the 2 conferences separately held by Roosevelt and Stalin in Roosevelt's quarters. Those were the old Tsar's quarters in the Lebedev Palace, to which Stalin came to meet with Roosevelt personally. We don't know what happened in those, but we can only surmise.
Of course, the Assistant Secretary of State at that time wrote a book called Imperium, saying that Roosevelt had committed collusion at that point with Stalin. We have some film footage, and we should touch upon that again if you remember that point. We're going to have some film footage right now. And, I understand you shot some of the film footage.
Yes,
is that right?
I took some film. The Signal Corps took film, of course, of everything, and I got some film from the Signal Corps and combined it with mine and made it into a 16mm film, which I still have, the original film I've still got.
Well, let's look at it.
This was the Naval Air Base, about 90 or 92 miles from Yalta.
Who is this man?
This is Molotov, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
You knew Molotov, is that
Oh, yes,
right?
I talked to him, yes. I talked to him any number of times while at the naval base and then later at Yalta.
Now, he had a treacherous reputation. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, the treacherous reputation is when he was negotiating with Great Britain and France for an alliance in August of 1939, while at the same time he was negotiating with Ribbentrop, the foreign minister under Hitler, and practically betrayed, Great Britain and France, and signed a pact with Hitler.
You know, we downplay that Russian-German pact that was responsible for dividing up Poland. Is that
if
right?
If it hadn't been for that pact, there would have been no war. In other words, Hitler had to secure the neutrality of Russia to do what he did in invading Poland. And if it hadn't been for the pact, I don't think Hitler would have dared, as a matter of fact, to invade Poland.
But he effectively neutralized Russia for the first...
He neutralized Russia through that pact.
Who else are we seeing here?
Here is the British military group, Marshal Alexander, speaking to the Russian command. Here is Anthony Eden, Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain, a very knowledgeable individual. See, we were coming in from Malta, and the planes were landing every few minutes, bringing the 2 respective delegations, the British and the American. See, originally, President Roosevelt met with Churchill at Malta. They had a preliminary conference. And then they came in on the 3rd of February. Right now he's speaking to Molotov through the interpreter, the young man in the uniform who spoke Russian and English. Here is the ambassador of Great Britain to Soviet Russia. He's speaking with his boss, Anthony Eden. Planes were coming in every 3 minutes, bringing the respective delegations, American and the British. The Russians, of course, were already there. Greeting them as they stepped off the plane. This is Admiral King, our Chief of Naval Operations. Next to him is General Somerville. This is the British group. Military personnel. Stettinius coming in right now.
And what did you think of Stettinius?
Well, very well-dressed man, nice-looking, handsome individual, but I doubt very much whether he knew anything about Russia. He'd been relatively new in the State Department, and he was an undersecretary under Cordell Hull when he was made Secretary of State, and I have serious doubt that he knew very much about it. Here he's speaking with the Russian naval commander of the base. Here's Harry Hopkins speaking to Molotov through the interpreter, Russian interpreter. He's shaking hands with Gromyko, who was then ambassador, Soviet ambassador to the United States.
So Russia really controlled the conference, both as to the site and to the timing, and really got what they wanted out of it. They got Eastern Europe.
I would say definitely that is the case. Of course, you've got to remember that Roosevelt, apparently, because of Harry Hopkins' advice, may have got from Hopkins, too much of the pro-Stalin attitude.
Now there's a myth which should be dispelled. There's a myth that Russia suffers paranoia because of being invaded. But if you look throughout history from the old Muscovite townships in the 12th century, Russia has invaded 90% of the time and only been invaded 10% of the time.
That's correct.
So the predominance is they've been more warlike than warred upon.
Oh, very much so. Here is the Chief of Staff of the Army. Although I was an Air Force man, I was assigned to General Marshall at General Marshall's request. And I was the interpreter for General Marshall. There is our naval group. Admiral King, Chief of Naval Operations. Here's General Marshall, the naval commander of the base. There's one point that I'd like to make also, that we seem to be very soft in our dealing with Russia. Time and again we hear almost everyone from Stalin to Gorbachev, look what we have lost in the war. We lost far more than either the United States or Great Britain or the two countries together or France. We lost over 20 million people in that war. Why don't we come back and say, who brought on the war?